So welcome everybody. This is the last part of our 2 days program. Thank you everybody for coming here. Thank you Kuda.org and all the others for setting this up, and thank you Kenneth for coming here. I would just say a few words. You already know Kenneth from ubu.com, talking about it also from before. But what I found much more kind of inspiring when it comes to the word, a live word, is when you talk about the poetry, about the literature, about the today's creative, or what you call uncreating writing or poetry or conceptual. So I think that there is a lot of media theory which comes from understanding the technology and then understanding the media through that kind of corpus of knowledge. But then there is a huge and very exciting knowledge which comes from the body of literature. And I'm glad that we have Kenneth here to bring that, because I think that these are the big two fields, at least for me, which are kind of competing for the best media theory. So even some people would call it poetry. I like to see it as a theorizing, as a media theory and literature theory. And just few words about the uncreative creative writing. So creative writing is something which is well established in US. There are a lot of departments on best universities where you can go and get a diploma for creativity, for creative writing. So in that sense, going with the idea of uncreativity is just it resonates a lot in US, and there are very few departments outside of US which are called creative writing, maybe 2 in Germany. I don't know for the others. And that's what I thought should be enough for your lecture. So the stage is yours.
Thank you, Marcel, and thank you everybody for coming. It's such a great honor to be here with so many heroes of mine, including Dushan and Simon. It's just absolutely an honor, and I feel humbled. I'm going to be reading for about a half hour from a work in progress, which is poetry, but probably closer to poetics and some kind of theory. And maybe 20 minutes to a half hour, and then I thought we could have a few minutes of discussion. So hopefully we won't go too long. I only look to theory when I realize that somebody has dedicated their entire life to a question I have only fleetingly considered. I used to be an artist, then I became a poet, then a writer. Now, when asked, I simply refer to myself as a word processor. Writing should be as effortless as washing the dishes, and as interesting. Hunter S. Thompson retyped Hemingway and Fitzgerald novels. He said, "I just want to know what it feels like to write these words." The internet is destroying literature, and it's a good thing. Last night, for instance, I did a reading of a transcribed text, and after I was done, I looked up to see several members of the audience in tears. And yet I didn't write a word of what I read. It's crucial to remember that language, any language, is embedded with emotion and expression, and it doesn't take much to draw that out. It's surprising how little writers have to do. We're working with words, which are loaded material. I recommend the lightest possible touch. Contemporary writing is the evacuation of content. The future of writing is the managing of emptiness. The future of writing is pointing. The future of reading is not reading. Toward a poetics of hyperrealism. Alphanumeric code, indistinguishable from writing, is the medium by which the internet has solidified its grip on literature. Plagiarism is necessary, Lautréamont insisted. Progress implies it. Authenticity is another form of artifice. It is possible to be both inauthentic and sincere. Never forget that poetry is performance. The moment you stand up in front of people, you are no longer authentic. Conceptual writing is political writing. It just prefers to use someone else's politics. Obama regularly copies his speechwriter's work out in longhand on legal pads. It helps me organize my thoughts, he says. Jonathan Franzen said, "The internet is of no relevance at all to writing fiction, which expresses verities only found through observation and introspection." Jonathan Franzen famously wrote portions of the corrections while wearing a blindfold and earplugs to reduce distractions. Writers are becoming curators of language, a move similar to the emergence of the curator as artist in the visual arts. Sampling and citation are but boutique forms of appropriation. Remixing is often mistaken for appropriation. Short attention span is the new silence. Our poetry has eerily begun to resemble data trails. The new memoir is our browser history. It's a mistake to mistake content for content. An article in China Daily refers to a young worker who copied a dozen novels, signed his name, and published a collection of his works. Richard Prince recently took America's most valuable literary property, The Catcher in the Rye, and made drop-dead facsimiles of the first edition. Everywhere Salinger's name appeared, Prince substituted his. He sells a signed copy bearing the signature of Richard Prince for whatever Salinger's signed first edition is going for that day. Christian Book says, "I always joke with my students that poetry couldn't possibly be as hard as they think it is, because if it were as hard as they thought it was, poets wouldn't do it. Really, they're the laziest, stupidest people I know. They became poets in part because they were demoted to that job, right? You should never tell your students to write what they know because, of course, they know nothing. They're poets. If they knew something, they'd be in that discipline actually doing it. They'd be in history or physics or math or business or whatever it is where they could excel. David Tudor says, well, I let it play itself as much as I can, but if it doesn't, then I interfere. Non-interventionist writing. At Tony Alsler's retrospective at the Williams College Museum of Art, upstairs, buried deep within the galleries, the artist had set up a microphone into which anyone could stand up and speak. What they said would be broadcast into the entrance atrium of the museum. There were no restrictions on what you could say, only a small note reminding the speaker to be sensitive of others, and a gentle suggestion to refrain from swearing. When it was my turn, I said in my clearest and most radio-like voice, "May I have your attention? May I have your attention? The museum is now closing. Please make your way to the exit. Thank you for visiting." Although it was hours away from closing time, I repeated the announcement again and saw in the video monitor that was provided people streaming toward the exit. Again, I made my announcement. At once, a frantic elderly guard came running up to me, grabbed my arm, and said, "You're not allowed to say that." When I told him that there was nothing prohibiting me from saying it, he again told me that I wasn't allowed. "Why?" I asked. "Because it's not true," he replied. "You must stop saying that right now." Of course, I repeated my announcement again. This poor man was really struggling what to do with me. He knew that while I wasn't breaking any laws, by screwing with the institution, I was breaking an unwritten social contract. Listening to music has become literary, requiring typing and sorting. We select what we hear based on keywords. Poetry's next or final move, institutional critique. Andy Warhol said, "My style was always to spread out anyway rather than to move up. To me, the ladder of success was much more sideways than vertical." Two back-to-back readings, the first in Chicago. Met at the airport by a limousine who drives me to a glamorous and crowded art venue where no one listens. Chauffeured back to the airport, all in one day. Superb pay. The next night, I do a reading at a tiny bar in the East Village. Took the subway there. 10 engaged people in the audience. No pay. Turns out to be the best reading I've ever done. John Cage said, "People insist upon self-expression. I really am opposed to it. I don't think people should express themselves in that kind of way." Tan Lin says, "A good poem is very boring. In a perfect world, all sentences would have that overall sameness." Hyoji Yamamoto says, "Start copying what you love. Copy, copying, copying, and at the end of the copy, you will find yourself." Bob Dylan on appropriation. Wussies and pussies complain about it. They spoke of the idea that in China, additional books are written and inserted into extant canons. There are 10 Harry Potter books in the Chinese series, as opposed to the 7 penned by J.K. Rowling. The aesthetics of sufficiency. Displacement is the new translation. The necessity of bad transcription, working to make sure that the pages in the book match the way the high school typist had transcribed them, right down to the last spelling mistake. I wanted to do a bad book, just the way I'd done bad movies and bad art, because when you do something exactly wrong, you always turn up something. Andy Warhol. Choice is authorship, legitimate authorship. The genius in Christian book Xenotext is not in the text. Formally, it's not a remarkable poem, but rather in the program and process he used to construct it. This is conceptual literature. John Cage said, if I look at a Coca-Cola bottle and then look at another Coca-Cola bottle, I want to forget the first Coca-Cola bottle in order to see the second Coca-Cola bottle as being original. And it is original because it's in a different position in space and time, and the light shining on it is differently, so that no two Coca-Cola bottles are the same. If I raised my kids the way I write my books, I'd have been thrown in jail a long time ago. My muse is the fluorescent tube. It is cold and affectless. It is unflattering and functional. It is bland and neutral. It flattens all it touches. It's harsh, ugly, industrial, and efficient. It is cheap and economical. It is ubiquitous, universal, and global. It is amoral. It has no agenda. It is past and it is present. Choosing to be a poet is like choosing to have cancer. Marshall McLuhan said half a century ago, any newspaper today is a collective work of art, a daily book of industrial man, an Arabian Nights entertainment in which 1,001 astonishing tales are being told by an anonymous narrator to an equally anonymous audience. The voice hydrates the driest of texts. Beckett, in 1984, on Duchamp's Ready-Mades, a writer could not do that. After giving a reading in Los Angeles, another reader on the bill came up to me and exclaimed, "You didn't write a word you spoke tonight." Lately, it seems like I'm becoming more interested in the paratextual materials in books, the author's biography, the back jacket copy, the publisher's list, the acknowledgments, the dedication, the Library of Congress information, and so forth. This is more interesting than the part that's supposed to be read. Driving down a Los Angeles boulevard, a billboard was legible from half a mile away. It said one or two words. In Los Angeles, people are used to reading single words, very large at far distances, and passing by them very quickly. It's totally the opposite in New York, where we get our information by reading a newspaper over somebody's shoulder in the subway. Andy Warhol said, "I don't make quality judgments. Things just are." Richard Prince says, "The telling of a true story is an unnatural act." There are no correct readings, only reproductions and possibilities. The Borgesian metric of infinity now seems hopelessly dated, a quaint relic of the 20th century, wedded to an equally dated idea of omniscience. A child could do what I do, but wouldn't dare to, for fear of being called stupid. Whenever I have an idea, I question myself whether it is sufficiently dumb. I ask myself, is it possible that this, in any way, could be considered smart? If the answer is no, then I proceed. Dumb doesn't go out of fashion because it's never in fashion. Dumb is stalled and irredeemable. It's too twisted, too weird, too contradictory, and takes too many turns of thought to be reduced to a slogan or an ad campaign. No matter how dumb they may appear, ad campaigns are invested in being smart. At the end of the day, you need to communicate smartly in order to get someone to buy something. Dumb muddies the waters. You get to dumb after going through smart. Smart is stupid because it stops at smart. Smart is a phase. Dumb is post-smart. Smart is finite, well-trod, formulaic, known. The world runs on smart. It's clearly not working. I want to live in a world where the smartest thing you can do is the dumbest. I want to live in a world where a fluorescent tube leaned up against a wall is worth $1 million. Uncreative writing is a practice that lies somewhere between constructing a Duchampian ready-made and downloading an MP3. The lesson: if everyone drinks the Kool-Aid, it becomes real. Innovate only as a last resort. Thank you.